Okay, welcome back. We are now going to be doing our second part of this, which is going to be adding drums to our little loop that we've created. Before we go on, I think it's good to have a little bit of organization, just so we don't get confused when we're arranging this. We're going to first rename our channels so that we know what all of these things are doing. So the first channel is our grand piano. So I'm just going to rename that to piano. So to rename stuff, it's just Control R. You can also right click and hit rename. So here I'm just going to write piano chords. And then I'm going to hit tab before I hit enter. And that's going to let me rename the next channel straight away without having to hit Control R. Okay, this is our sub bass. Hit tab again. This is going to be our lead melody. And then our ARP. Okay, and I generally like to keep my bass kind of at the bottom, just because bass is at the bottom. And I'm going to color it like a nice orange color. I'm going to also assign track color to clips. So now it's a bit more clear what everything is doing. You can also rename clips if you like, but that's a bit more monotonous and time consuming. You can hit Control R when you highlight on a clip and write chords, for example, and then you can see what they're doing. So if you're a very organized person and you don't mind spending time doing stuff like this, then you can do it, but I typically don't do that. I like to just work quickly, so yeah. All right, so drums. There's two ways we can use drums. We can either use audio channels or we can use MIDI channels like we've been doing before. I'm going to show you both ways so that you have options and you can just choose whatever works for you. In my opinion, MIDI is the best way to do your drums. It's just so much more flexible and down the line allows for a lot more complexity within your drums and a lot more control. But I think it's important to learn both ways because audio is also really powerful for not just drums but many other reasons. I've got another channel over here. I'm just going to delete that channel. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a kick drum to this. And now I haven't spoken about BPM yet, or tempo, but all songs have a certain tempo. It determines the speed that they go. And at the moment we're set to 120 BPM. That's just the default BPM in Ableton. But you can change that. You can turn that up or down. You can make it a slow tempo, which is more like kind of hip-hop tempo, like 96. You can go back up to 120 where we were, or like 124 is like more like housey. All the way up to more like dubstep tempos. And drum and bass is like 170. Okay, so we're just going to go back down. I think we're going to set it to, let's go for like 122. And we're going to be doing like a, we're going to be doing a kind of like a house beat. So the first thing we want is a kick drum. And we want a kick drum to land on every beat. So how do we know where the beats are? We can divide up our grid into beats. A beat is typically a quarter note. And so if I turn on my metronome, this little thing here, and just play, each one of those little clicks is a beat. And with house music, we have a kick drum on every beat or every quarter note. So we want to go in and find a kick drum. I'm going to be using my sample packs for this. This is completely optional. Ableton has its own set of sounds which are really nice sounds and they'll work. You can go into drums here and look at drum hits, for example, and go down to like kicks. and they have a whole bunch of options for you there. So if you don't want to buy any sample packs, you absolutely don't need to, but they can make your life a bit easier having access to a bunch of curated sounds, like the ones from myself, can help speed things up. So I have these 2 packs here, Artist Kicks Volume 1 and Volume 2. And these are kick drums that I've basically recreated from songs that I love by artists that I love. So I know that they work well. So I'm going to be using Artist Kicks Volume 2. Let's just find a kick drum that sounds nice. This one, and I'm just going to drag it here onto the timeline. So this is nice about audio, is to use audio, you're simply going to be going into your folders and dragging and dropping stuff. So I haven't really gone into this yet. This is your like your user library, and it's just a quick way to access files on your hard drive. So if you have a sample pack and you've downloaded it, you can literally just go into any folder. Here I've just opened up a bunch of random folders here on my hard drive, and this is just like some of my music stuff. And for example, if I have a whole bunch of sounds downloaded, I can just drag that into here, and then I'll have access to everything that's inside it, and I can hear it there, and I can drag it onto my timeline, for example. So let's just delete that. So yeah, here I've dragged in a kick drum, and now if I play, I hear the kick drum there. But remember, I said I want a kick drum on every beat, so we're just going to highlight that and hit Control D 4 times, and now I've got a kick drum on each beat. That sounds horrible though. Why does it sound horrible? Remember what I told you earlier on about the volume, and we need to make sure that the volume is always in the green and there's a bit of headroom, a bit of space between the highest peak and 0 dB. And if it goes over, it goes red and it sounds ugly. Well, that's happening now. And the reason for that is because the kick drum is too loud. It's also stacking with all the other sounds, and when you stack sounds on top of each other, they tend to get louder and louder. So you need to be constantly controlling this. And so you'll find yourself constantly going back to these faders and turning stuff down, turning stuff up. And yeah, that's just the normal workflow. So let's just bring that down. So how loud to set your kick drum? There's no magical numbers, but typically when you're working, you kind of want to have the number that gets thrown around about 6 dB of headroom, 6 dBs of space between 0 and your loudest peak over here. Here you can see we're doing -7. That's fine. Doesn't even matter if you're doing -1, as long as there's a bit of space there, but 6 dB gives you a bit of room to make mistakes. And your kick drum is usually the loudest element in your track, so if you have that as your loudest element and everything else is kind of mixed around that, you should be good. So I don't want to peg you to certain numbers and make you sit there and stress about it not being at -6. It doesn't matter. It's not going to sound any better if it's at -6 versus -8 or -3. Point is, we just want headroom. We don't want a clip. Okay. So that's one way to add a kick drum, and we can sit here and keep on duplicating this across. But I don't really like working like that. So I'm going to show you another way to do that, and that is using a MIDI channel. Here we're going to make a new MIDI channel, Control-Shift-T. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find our kick drum. And instead of dragging it onto the playlist here, because if I do this, drag it here, it's going to convert that channel back into an audio channel. We're going to just drag it onto here, drop an instrumental sample here. And now it's loaded into something called a simpler. Simpler is like a simple sampler for Ableton. Samplers are things that it's basically like a bit of software that you load a sound into, and it will allow you to manipulate that sound, play it back, change it in many different ways. There's kind of loads of options here. It all looks very confusing. But yeah, you're going to become very well acquainted with this, and I suggest learning it in detail because it's very powerful and you're going to be using it a ton. All right, so now we're going to play some MIDI clip. I just double clicked here on this block. You can also highlight and do Control-Shift-M, or you can right click and insert empty MIDI clip. Okay, so we only need one MIDI clip and we only need one note. Here we're going to place a note at C3. The reason we use C3 is that is the middle C note on your keyboard. It's like the default key on your keyboard. And if we play that using a simpler or a sampler, it plays the kickback at its kind of default pitch. If I had to place this higher up on a different note, it plays it higher up, plays it at a higher pitch, not its original pitch. You'll see if I play it really high, it's really high up. If I go down, you can barely even hear it. So let's go back up to C3. Now, with this loop enabled here, we can literally just drag this along, and the kick is going to be duplicated across the whole timeline here. You can also loop the kick drum in the audio way, and to do that you just highlight a quarter note here. Sorry, I didn't mean to create that. Highlight a quarter note, and we're going to hit type consolidate, or right click and hit consolidate, or Control J, and then we just turn on the loop brace and we can drag that across. That's much quicker and cleaner than copy pasting a million times. Okay, so yeah, the end result is the same. We've got a kick drum down, but we've done it in two different ways, and this way just creates a bit more flexibility. And so what do I mean by that? Here we can control a lot of things about the kick drum using this sampler. We can easily shorten the length of it. We can transpose it up or down, pitch it up and down really easily. We can add some randomness to it using LFOs. I'm not going to explain that too much, but just know that we can add variation randomness really easily. One thing you will notice is that this kick drum's a lot quieter than the other one. You just need to turn it up here. Okay, so I'm going to stick to MIDI for this, but we will go back to audio and use audio for other drum sounds. For now, I'm just going to delete that kick to make it less confusing. Okay, cool, we've got a kick drum down. Yay. Okay, next up, let's get a hi-hat down. Okay, so we're just going to go into our hi-hats here. I'm using this pack, Gentle Hats. And we're going to just go for like a shaker kind of hat sound. Let's go for that one. And let's drag the hi-hat down here. Okay, the problem is the hi-hat is snapping to this grid and it's on the set to quarter notes at the moment. And we don't want our hi-hat to play this pattern, because that's a bit boring and not very groovy. Where I want my hi-hat is to land between the kick drums, halfway between the kick drums. So we're going to divide up our grid into eighth notes now. And now we can place these between the kick drums. Cool. So we can duplicate that across, or you can use MIDI like I've done here. Again, MIDI is the preferred way to do it. But it's good to get used to working in audio because we will use it a lot for other things. So yeah, let me just, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just consolidate all of this. I'm going to hit Control J. And now we've got to turn on loop, and then we can drag this out. Okay, now let's add in another drum sound. Let's grab our clap. So typically with house music, we've got a clap landing on every other kick. So the second kick and the fourth kick. So let's go in and grab clap sound. Let's grab that one. We're going to put it on the second kick and also on the fourth one. And we're going to turn that down a bit. Okay, so the kind of clap that we use is really determined by the mood of the track. And you might not want something so snappy and punchy. Maybe you want something a bit darker. Like this. And I think that fits this track a bit more. It's a really like chilled out track. So let's go with that. We can also add a little bit of variation to this clap so it's not so boring when we hear it over and over again. How about on this one we pitch it down slightly? So here we can use the pitch tool. I'm going to hit the down arrow once, and now it's going to be pitched down 1 semitone. So that one's just a bit lower down than this one, and that introduces a bit of variation. Now if I consolidate these together, we can loop them and drag it all the way across. I'm going to show you another little trick we can do working in audio, and then you'll see why audio is so powerful. Audio is a great way for us to manipulate audio sounds, and we can very quickly do things like reversing samples. So if I just take our clap and drag it onto another channel below it, we can do things like reversing by just clicking on the sample and hitting R on our keyboard. Now it plays it backwards. And we can do something like this where we have it, maybe we put it on the fourth clap. And let's divide up this grid even more granularly. So into 16ths we can divide it, or we can just turn on narrow, and then that scales with the amount that we zoomed in. So if you don't know how to zoom in and out, the way I do it is just by clicking and dragging up and down here. There's other keyboard shortcuts and stuff you can use, but this is how I've always done it. I'm just so used to it. I'm probably never going to stop doing it that way. So yeah, I'm going to zoom in really close, and what I want is this clap to like fade into this one. But I'm going to cut out some of the sample. So we're going to make it a bit shorter. I'm also going to click this button again so we're not in automation mode anymore. I'm going to add a little fade out. The reason I add that fade is without fades, you tend to get clicking sounds at the end of samples. It's not clicking now, but sometimes you will hear them, especially if you have like musical instruments and stuff. So I want this to kind of fade into this one. Let's make this one a bit quieter. And now if we play this, you'll see what effect this has on the drums. Cool, so we got a little bit of variation in there. Let's repeat that variation through the track. I'm going to highlight this section, and we can either duplicate it across, but the better workflow to get used to is to consolidate and then loop the section that you want, just like that. And let's just turn that down again. Now I want a nice fast hi-hat, one that's going and that's going to be on the 16th. So let's put it below our shaker. Let's go back to our hats, and we're going to choose another like shaker sound. Something that's short and snappy. I'm going to double click on that, and now it's on a MIDI channel. And if it didn't go into a MIDI channel when you double clicked, just make sure you have a MIDI channel by hitting Ctrl-Shift-T, select the MIDI channel and double click on the hat. And then it'll appear in there. Okay, now you can highlight a section. I only want a very short section, just one beat, which is, if you remember, a beat is just a quarter note. Quarter note is that wide. Double click. And then we're going to place 4 little notes here, because we want them in 16ths. 4 16ths makes a quarter. Now if I play this, we're getting these nice fast hi-hats. You can drag that all the way out and listen to it. I think it's too loud, doesn't sound very nice when it's that loud. It also feels very robotic because it's just like very straight and computerized. We can add a little bit of bounce to it, a bit of groove by using our velocities. So let's take the first 2 notes and hold Alt and just turn down the velocity. So the first 2 notes are quiet, the second 2 are loud. Let's make that last one a little quieter. And listen to that. Okay, so here comes a bit of the power of our simpler. I want this to not just land in one spot on the stereo field. I kind of want it to be panning around left and right. So if you grab this and pan it left and right, you'll hear what I mean. It's moving from the left to the right speaker, but we can do that automatically using here under controls. We can go to random panning and just turn that up to like 17% or something. And now it's moving around a lot. You can turn it to 100% if you want to hear the effect exaggerated. That's just too busy, so let's bring it back down to like here, 20% maybe. There's other ways to add some more randomness and interest to it, but I'm not going to get into those. We'll just try and introduce 1 or 2 new things at a time, keep it a bit more simple. The cool thing also with this is we can change the start point of the sample. So if I solo this and drag this forward, you can hear how it's starting the sample from this play point. And so try adjusting this while we're listening to it and see what it does to the feel of the track. Maybe it gets a bit more groovy. I quite like it there. Maybe you can also play with these features like attack. Attack, if you remember, will make the beginning of the note feel a bit softer. Maybe over there is nice. Okay, the drums are getting there. I think it would be cool to have like maybe some percussion in there, not just kick, hats and claps, maybe something like a tom. So Ableton actually comes with a load of toms. Yeah, you can go into drums and just search tom. And here we can hear a bunch of them. I think we can just go with this 808 tom. And I'm just going to hit Ctrl-Shift-T for a new MIDI channel and double click on the tom. And now maybe we can make a cool pattern. So toms are great to kind of like play off of the kick. So sometimes it's nice to solo the kick drum and the tom and just try and figure out a pattern for them to work together. Now remember, we're going to be using C3 because that's the default note. Let's place a tom on, if we divide this up into 16ths, on the 4th 16th, and then on the middle between these, between point 1, point 2 and 1.3. And this is going to create kind of like an Afro rhythm, or like Mumbaton, if you know that genre. It's kind of do 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 kind of rhythm. But feel free to experiment, and maybe you'll find something else just by moving these around. That sounds nice. Remember to just drag this out with the loop brace enabled so that you can repeat this over and over again. Let's hear how that sounds. Let's listen to the other rhythm that we first made. I'm just going to go with that one. It's a simple standard rhythm. Sounds good. Okay, so now we've got some basic drums down. I think it'll be good to add some drum fills, like things that happen at the end of every 8 bars or something, just to add a little bit more variation. Let's divide this back into the narrow grid. It's a bit easier to work with. And we can make some drum fills, or we can just find some drum fill samples. Maybe we can make some. We can take, what about something like a snare? If I just search snare, here in Ableton, just search for a kind of like a snare drum. Let's go with something a bit more like acoustic. I like that one. And I'm just going to make a new MIDI channel, double click on that. And what I want to do is at the kind of end of a section, like how long is that? We can measure how long things are just by highlighting a section and looking at this bar over here where it says a new update is available. If we hover over that, that bar changes at the bottom and it tells you length. It says 4. That's 4 bars. You can also count the bars up here, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 4 bars. So I'm going to highlight a 4-bar section. And at the end of the 4 bars, I want to have a little snare fill. So I'm just going to add 2 little snares right at the end. I'm going to make this one a little quieter than that one. And that should sound like this. Can turn it up a little bit. So it's a very simple kind of technique, just adding fills. This is not too in your face, but it just adds a little bit of variation and brings you back around into the next bar. Especially if you have something like a little crash afterwards, that can help. Maybe what we can do is have that happen twice, and then on the second one we add the crash. Let's find a crash. I'm just going to search crash. And I'll use the Ableton sounds again. Quite like that one. And I'm just going to drag it down here. I'm going to use audio. And you'll see here warp is enabled. Because remember, it auto warps these shorter samples. Warping is basically stretching a sample, either stretching it or shortening it. And we don't really need to use warping unless we're trying to make something fit rhythmically, like, for example, a drum loop. If we're dragging in an entire loop and it's not in time, then we'd use warping to get it in time. If you're confused by that, don't worry about it. Just make sure it's off if you're just using single hits like crashes. And now I'm going to just turn that down because I know it's going to be really loud. There we go. And maybe we can add a bit more variation, like maybe we can add another snare there. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, remember I said I wanted variation? Now because this is looped and I added this, it's going to add them every time. So we actually need to extend the length of this loop. We want it to be twice as long. So here we can go to length and change that from 4 up to 8. And now we can duplicate this across. And now our loop is this whole section. And if we add the variation on the last one, it only adds it to the last one on this one and that one, and not on every single block here. We can maybe make this a bit different. There we go, something like that. Might be cool to add a little bit of delay to this snare so it bounces around a bit. Let's turn that down, turn on ping pong. I think that's too much. Let's make the timing of it a bit shorter. Bring down the filter to... And let's bring down the dry weight a bit. There we go. Okay, we got a pretty simple drum loop down, but it's got most of the sort of sounds that we would need, and it's feeling pretty complete. One thing that is left to do with this loop is to add a bit of sidechain. Okay, so sidechain is a very important thing to use to make room for elements to fit together. So, for example, our sub bass, if we just have a look, what I'm going to do is on my master, I'm going to put an EQ. And what this is just a visual representation of the frequencies of whatever sound it is that's busy playing. And your sub bass is typically down here on the left. And as sounds get brighter, like for example our shaker, those are being played high up. Now if you have a sub bass and something like a kick drum playing together, they tend to stack up on top of each other and get really loud. It also makes it difficult for the ear to distinguish between them because they're playing in very similar frequency ranges. If you think about, for example, two people having a conversation, if two people are talking with the same exact tone at exactly the same time, you're not going to be able to distinguish between them. But if you have like a baby talking and an adult with a really deep voice, you can very easily hear that there's two different people talking. Same thing in music. So where we have our kick drum and our bass drum and our sub bass playing together, we want to make a bit of room for that kick drum to come through. How do we do that? We use something called sidechain. Sidechain is basically just taking the volume of one element and turning it down while that other element is playing. And to illustrate this, I can show you using just plain old volume. So if I take my volume here and automate that, and basically just turn down my sub bass each time the kick drum plays. The kick drum is landing over there and over there and over there. So if I take this automation and duplicate it across, we now get this sort of sound. And that's what side chaining stuff to your kick drum is going to sound like. But I don't want to sit here and manually do this every time the kick drum plays. That's tedious and just not a very effective way of doing it. Or yeah, it'll just take a lot of time. I mean, you can make it work. Some people do it like that, but a much better way to do it is to just use a compressor. So I'm just going to double click on this Ableton compressor. And here we're going to open this up, this button. We're going to turn on sidechain. And then we're going to tell the sidechain what channel we are sidechaining to. We're sidechaining it to the kick drum. So it takes the input of the kick drum. We're going to choose our kick. And now when I play these two together, you'll see, even though we have the sub bass channel selected, it's seeing the kick drum come through because I have the sidechain selected. And as I bring down this threshold here, below that signal, it's going to turn down the volume just as I did manually. And if I exaggerate it, we get that pumping feeling that we had before when I manually did it. But that's just too much. It's overboard. So we can fine-tune this sidechain using these dials. And I'm just going to give you some numbers here that you can use just to keep things simple, at least in the beginning, and then you can always experiment later on. So I tend to set this frequency to this high pass shape. So if it's selected on any one of these other ones, you need to select it to this curve, and then turn the frequency up to around 1000 hertz, so 1 kilohertz. And what that's going to do is make our little point really sharp. And then we can use this release over here to make this longer or shorter, and that's going to give us more of that pumping feeling or less of it. If I bring down the threshold, you'll hear it again. And just to illustrate it further, if I had to just render this out to audio, don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I'm just showing you what it looks like in audio. You can see that's what the signal looks like with sidechain, but without sidechain, it's going to look like because we have our kick drum. If I just visualize what that looks like, we now have basically a scenario where our kick plays and then our sub bass plays. Our kick plays and then our sub bass plays. And this is a lot cleaner. It allows for both of these to have their own space. They're not stacking on top of each other and, you know, creating a scenario where we have the volume going up too much. It makes it easier to mix this track and make it louder and sound better. So yeah, that's sidechain for you. And you can apply that to as many elements as you want, but you should just be careful and use it sparingly, because otherwise you start getting this really like pumping zip, zip, zip feeling on every element, and it starts to sound a bit unnatural and can be a bit cheesy, I think. So yeah, let me just delete all of this. turn on our sidechain again. I don't want it to be so deep, so I'm just going to I'm going to bring down the ratio. The ratio is the amount of the sidechain that's happening. And can you hear that like little clicking sound? There's a little like clicking sound each time the volume goes down. We can get rid of that using something called look ahead and attack. So if we just turn up look ahead to 10 milliseconds and the attack to 10 milliseconds, that clicking is gone now. That just tells the compressor to look ahead in time by 10 milliseconds. And the attack just says, instead of immediately dropping the volume down, do it over 10 milliseconds. And that more gentle turning down of volume gets rid of that click. So now you can listen with the compressor. We can copy it and paste it to every other element and see how it sounds with sidechain on everything. See, I don't really like that. It's like a very noticeable effect and it can get a bit tiring to the ears in my opinion. So I'm not going to use it on all the other elements. I don't think it needs it. So let's just take it off the ARP. We're just going to leave it on the sub bass, and we can maybe leave it on the piano chords because, well, the piano chords also have low frequencies in them. Let's quickly visualize that by looking at the piano chords. Can you see that low sub frequency? That's going to be conflicting with the kick drum. And a little tip for you, that's also probably going to be conflicting a little bit with the sub bass, or stacking up with the sub bass and getting really loud and muddy. So we might want to go into the piano and just get rid of those low frequencies. We can do that using our EQ. So on the piano we can set this first point to this high pass filter and just drag that up. And as you drag that up, you'll see those frequencies get quieter and you can hear the effect of it. So now we've gotten rid of those low frequencies. We don't really need the sidechain, but it might sound nice to have a little bit of the sidechain on the piano too. So I'm just going to copy that over. In my opinion, that crash should actually be coming a bit later. It feels a bit too soon. So let's put it over here, and then we'll take this entire loop and duplicate it one more time. Okay, so we're actually kind of busy arranging this track just by duplicating this over and moving forward with it. And let's see how long it is. The duration, if we look at the bottom, it's 32 bars. The length is 32 bars, the duration is 1 minute. 1 minute's a pretty standard length to have, like a drop section in a standard house track. So that might be long enough before we start making like our little breakdown section. But one thing to remember is now that we've copied this over, all of our automation has also been copied. So we had automation. If we just click on this, you can see that red line goes up and then it fades back down. We might not want that to happen. So let's just delete those points and we can just keep on opening it up as it goes along. And the same thing with the lead melody. We'll just keep on opening that up until it's fully open. Okay, let's listen to our track. Actually, before we do that, one thing we can do is maybe make a bit more of a difference between this section and this section. So aside from everything opening up over time, what happens if we remove the 16th shaker, this fast one, from the first half? and it only comes in the second half. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, so we've basically written our drop, so to speak. I wouldn't exactly call this a drop. It's not like a big tech house track. But yeah, we've basically arranged something that we can use. And so I think from this point on, all that's left to do is take what we've made here and finish arranging the track. We need a breakdown, we need a second drop, we need an intro, and we need an outro. And so that shouldn't be too hard. All right, so I'm going to pause the video and then we're going to take a little break and come back and arrange this.